The ground in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Also joining me is senior political writer at BuzzFeed, McKay Coppins, and senior political reporter at the Huffington Post, Amanda Terkel. So much to get to this morning when it comes down to this race. Let's start with you. Casey, you spent the last 24 hours on the ground there. Give us a sense of the mood from both sides and how everything is just fired up to this point.
This has been a really long campaign for both sides. It's been nasty. It's been hard fought. This runoff has been even nastier than the original primary campaign. At this point, Cochran's supporters are weary but nervous. I mean, the sort of conventional wisdom going into this was that McDaniel would pretty easily be able to pull it off. History and runoff shows that typically if there's an insurgent candidate like McDaniel, that they'll pull it out in the end. That said, money has flooded into Cochran's campaign from establishment groups in Washington. McCain was down here, as you noted. Brett Favre is in an ad that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is running for him. So I think that there is a sense that there's a little bit of an unknown here among the Cochran. On the McDaniel side, I would say they're really just trying to fight this out to the end and ride that wave that took him this far. The National Tea Party really has a lot riding on how well he does. They've basically bankrolled his campaign. Outside groups have been the ones spending the most money on the air. So at this point, you know, McDaniel's campaign is just trying to get through the finish line. We talked to him yesterday a little bit about what this campaign has been like, and he said the first thing he wants to do after this is all over is go to Disney World. So clearly everybody's a little bit worn out.
Well, if you think about it in terms of money, we're talking about as of early this month, Cochran with over 400,000. Well, McDaniel had just 60,000, a little over that. So let's talk about this, you know, as a five-term senator here and John McCain, you talked to him joining the fray on Monday for his six-term colleague here. You put the establishment question to him, and, you know, he spoke to you about that. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, John McCain, you know, was down here arguing that he and Senator Cochran both have years and years of experience, and that the reason not to back McDaniel in this election is because we are in dangerous times. There's crises going on in the Middle East, for example. McCain's very focused on national security. He says that Cochran is somebody who has the experience to lead. McDaniel, as a state legislator, has less experience. But one thing I would also point out more broadly about this race, as in the last 3 weeks, Cochran's campaign, or Cochran's supporters, that is, have focused on expanding the electorate. They've focused on potentially bringing African-American Democratic voters to the polls. And their argument is that Cochran has delivered for the state. He's brought back federal money, whereas McDaniel has argued he'd want to make big cuts to the federal money that Mississippi gets, cuts to education, potentially cuts to defense. He initially stumbled earlier in the campaign about whether or not he would have voted for aid in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. So McDaniel's campaign argues that that's a disingenuous strategy, that only Republicans should be voting in Republican primaries, and they say that it could be illegal if those voters had voted in the Democratic primary 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, stirring up the whole racial divide, even claims of voter intimidation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But, McKay, I want to get to you, you know, especially when we look at the New York Times here in the first graph of it. They put it this way. Regardless of who wins today's unpredictable Republican Senate runoff in Mississippi, the fracas has sent a message to incumbents in Congress. It is no longer enough to be a diligent member, quietly representing your constituents' interests. You have to join the partisan fray. So has the Tea Party finally changed Washington, whether they win or not? Is that imprint permanent?
Well, certainly the Tea Party has tended to reward candidates who are not shy about demonstrating partisan fervor, who like to take the fight to Obama and the Democrats. They like candidates like that. Although I will say Eric Erickson, who's a prominent Tea Party voice, recently wrote a post on Red State, which I thought made a good point, where he said that Tea Party and the conservative grassroots is just as much about removing entrenched incumbents as it is about ideological purity. So, you know, even if that Cochran was 100% conservative, 100% on base with the Tea Party on every issue, there's still a good chance that there would have been a conservative uprising, because they want people who have been in Washington for 5 or 6 terms to get out, and they want new people in.
And we're hearing from him loud and clear. All right, Amanda, let's talk about this. If McDaniel does come through, as he put it on Sunday, next time Ted Cruz stands on the floor, next time Mike Lee stands on that floor, and next time Rand Paul stands on that floor to fight for you, a son of Mississippi will stand next to them. Now, if he's planning to be a Republican in the mold of Ted Cruz, what does that mean for what actually gets done in the Senate?
Well, it could be a problem. I mean, even if Republicans say they do win back the Senate, it could be a problem for Mitch McConnell as he actually tries to govern. I mean, you've heard that a lot about Republicans already in the House, that they're so fractured that it's not even clear what they want. John Boehner has a really tough time sort of getting his caucus together and actually governing and putting forth legislation that they all agree on. Mitch McConnell could have that same problem. Sure, on one hand, it's great if Republicans win back the Senate. On the other hand, you'll have people like Chris McDaniel, who feels like he came to Washington with a mandate to sort of oppose the establishment. So it could be very tough, and voters may not like that. They may tell Republicans next time, you had your chance to govern, you blew it, and we're going to put Democrats back in. So I think many Republicans are worried about that as well.
All right, let's talk about now the race divide here and how that's being charged. McKay, the tight race also has Cochran, who's usually courting African-American votes and voters here in the GOP runoff. Here was McDaniel's response to that.
I'm not concerned about him being African-American. I'm concerned about him being liberal. That's always been my concern. If Senator Cochran is going to court liberal Democrats to save his seat, it is a clear indication that he has abandoned conservatives in the state of Mississippi.
Fair? No? Yes?
I think that part of the problem here is, you know, we saw this, all this evidence, and Casey touched on it, with vote watchers or poll watchers coming to the polls. You know, I think that it's tough because, yes, there is a case to be made that it's illegal for people who have voted in Democratic primaries to come and vote in these primaries in Mississippi. At the same time, how are you going to identify liberals, right? At some point, it's going to come down to saying, well, all these black voters are coming. Are they secretly Democrats? And you very quickly come to a point where there are questions about racial profiling and voter intimidation. That said, Democrats, you know, tend to always argue that voter intimidation is a big part of every election, just as conservatives always argue that there's a big thing, you know, plague of voter fraud. It's not necessarily as true as both sides want.
Well, let's throw in the other facet here with all of that, claims of voter intimidation, all of that, then the return of Ken Cuccinelli. Amanda, what is McDaniel and how is he reacting to that?
Well, McDaniel said that he believes that vote monitoring and poll watching is fine. And this is less about lawsuits. I mean, a voter would actually have to openly declare that they plan to support a different candidate in the general election than they are in the primary election. And most voters probably aren't going to do that. Experts say that this is really more about intimidating voters and trying to discourage Democrats from coming out to vote at all in the first place.
All right, McKay Compton's, Amanda Terkel and Casey Hunt. Thank you all for your perspective. We should all stick around as the day progresses.